The police sergeant who twice hit a woman protesting against the G20 with his metal baton was cleared of assaulting her today. The judge decided he could have been acting in self-defence even though she was only carrying a camera and a carton of orange juice. Protection of the right to demonstrate is trumpeted by almost all parties. But are the courts now deliberately imposing draconian sentences on protesters? The claim follows disturbances 3 months before the G20 at demonstrations against the Israeli invasion of Gaza. Here's Peter Marshall.
They were big demonstrations, and after a long, difficult and emotional day, there was some violence, prompting now familiar concerns about policing and public order. What's happened since, though, raises serious questions about justice.
The police and the prosecution system have really treated this case as if it was a terrorist case.
Just being here now, actually, it brings back memories, and I'm quite scared. It was a bit of a nightmare.
They have presented a picture that suits a prosecution, but it's extremely worrying.
Joanna Gilmore researches criminal law. She's analysed how the justice systems dealt with those arrested in the weeks of protest against the Israeli invasion of Gaza. We met at the scene of the protest near the Israeli embassy in London.
There was a disproportionate number of people arrested, a disproportionate number of people charged with very serious offences as well. Of the 75 people charged, 65 were charged with violent disorder. Now, violent disorder is one of the most serious public order offences. It carries a maximum sentence of 5 years imprisonment. So we're talking really severe charges here launched against these generally young people.
While the demonstrators point to what they call provocative policing, the police say 55 officers were injured in the violence. What's not disputed is the police penned or kettled protesters into confined spaces and then took names and photographs before allowing individuals to leave. They later trawled through what they say was 1,000 hours of video surveillance tape before choosing who to charge. Months after the protests, Jake Smith found he was to be charged over his activities on 2 Gaza demonstrations on January the 3rd and the 10th.
I was certainly visible for the police on evidence that they tried to use against me, but then dropped. They were pointing me out a lot and targeting me. So. Was that because you were leading the chanting? Because there's video of you leading chanting. I think just generally because I was big and I was wearing a red hood. Maybe I stood out.
Jake Smith, in his red hood, was wrongly alleged to have thrown a stick at the police. But when his lawyer was finally allowed to see the unedited footage, he found no sign of his client assaulting anyone, but clear evidence of the police assaulting Jake Smith.
The police officer wouldn't let me view it on my own. I had to view it with him, and then we came across the footage where my client was being assaulted and left lying on the floor. The police officer said, I expect you'd like to see that again. I said I would.
They just ran at us with their batons raised and riot shields. Almost like some kind of ancient warrior or something out of another century, and just laid into protesters, which you can see on that video.
The police have said their use of force was appropriate. Jake Smith was lucky to have a lawyer who'd spent hours unpaid going through the videos, yet the lawyer was then legally forbidden from sharing what he'd seen with other defendants.
People were charged separately with separate trials, and we were given an undertaking, which I've not seen the like of before, that we're not allowed to disclose our police video to anybody else other than to our client.
The prohibition on sharing video evidence is, in the words of the Crown Prosecution Service, to prevent it appearing on websites, etc. But there are other features too which make the Gaza cases stand out.
Almost all of those who were arrested and charged in relation to the demonstrations were Muslim. They were generally young Muslims aged between about 17 and 24. And I think if you look at the way in which these people have been treated, they haven't been treated like ordinary criminals or ordinary political protesters. They've been treated as if they're terrorist suspects.
The police used the Terrorism Act to stop and search protesters. and there was more.
Most people weren't arrested at the demonstrations themselves. They were arrested following the demonstrations in a series of these dawn raids where the police targeted particular communities at different times throughout the summer last year. These frequently involved large numbers of frequently territorial support group police officers who burst into the houses of young people at 5 a.m, handcuffed family members, seized property, terrified communities, took people to the police station and interrogated them on their political and religious beliefs.
What happened when the cases came to court was also unusual. The defendants, appearing separately and represented by different lawyers, tell of being advised if they pleaded guilty, they could expect lighter penalties. What they didn't know was the judges were deciding to impose deterrent sentences. One by one, defendants appeared in court and were sent to jail.
My heart stopped and I just turned around. I just didn't face the judge no more, and my co-defendant, she was just screaming. She just didn't believe it, and the Reliance people put the handcuffs on us and took us down, and we just cried so much.
Layla is 19. She'd never before been on a demonstration and admits behaving badly. She pushed over a counter in a coffee shop after her group was scattered by the police. Her lawyer advised her to plead guilty and expect community service. She was jailed for 15 months.
There was a lot of women in there, like, have done major crimes and got the same sentence as me. Burglary at knife point, like selling drugs. So I just thought it's a bit unfair because I pushed over a counter.
Last week, Jake Smith went to court armed with video of his beating by the police to find the prosecution had dropped all charges against him. The next day, Layla was freed by an appeal court judge. He said her sentence was disproportionate. Other appeals are planned in the coming months.
Peter Marshall. Rwanda. The very name is enough to conjure up visions of unspeakable horror.